Just a few months ago, it seemed impossible. America's biggest ag states are still producing massive amounts of wheat, corn, meat, milk, and fruit. But suddenly the buyers are gone. Silos are overflowing, shipments are being turned away at the Canadian border, and more farmers are losing their most important markets. The reason isn't a drought or a natural disaster. Canada's new trade regulations from 2025 have sparked a crisis spreading from Texas to Florida and all the way to Iowa. Factories are cutting shifts, workers are losing their jobs, and some farmers are already considering skipping the next planting season entirely. In this video, we're showing 7 U.S. states whose agriculture has been hit especially hard. And in the end, a worrying question remains. Is America losing control over its own food supply? One Texas stands for cattle ranching, massive fields, and economic strength. But in 2025, even this proud agricultural state is coming under massive pressure. Canada was a reliable buyer for Texan beef, citrus fruit, corn, grain, and cottonseed for a long time. With the new trade regulations, though, that changed almost overnight. Beef shipments were rejected because of the use of growth hormones. Oranges and grapefruits from South Texas failed due to stricter limits on pesticide residues. Other shipments sat at inspections for days until contracts were canceled or the goods lost their value. For farmers, a rejected container is way more than just a financial loss. Behind every piece of meat and every harvest are families who get up early in the morning and have made a living from this work for generations. Now prices are falling, processing plants are cutting shifts, and more workers are losing their jobs. But Texas is starting to react. Some farmers are selling their products directly to families, local markets, and regional supermarkets. They don't want to be dependent on a trade system that can turn against them at any time anymore. Texas hasn't collapsed yet, but the crisis shows just how quickly even a powerful ag state can lose control. 2. Florida is getting hit twice as hard. First, the number of Canadian visitors dropped significantly. Hotels, restaurants, and resorts that used to buy huge amounts of regional oranges, tangerines, and grapefruits suddenly ordered much less. Right at harvest time, markets stayed empty, and tons of fresh fruit couldn't find a buyer. Then came the second blow. Because of stricter Canadian rules on pesticide residues, numerous ag shipments from Florida were rejected. The fruit couldn't be exported or fully sold on the domestic market. While fruit was left sitting on plantations, consumers in local supermarkets were seeing more and more imported products from Mexico. For many farmers, it's hard to wrap their heads around. They're producing food right on people's doorsteps, but can't sell it anymore. Florida is losing its customers and its most important markets at the same time. This makes the Sunshine State a scary example of how fast a regional economy can start to wobble when tourism and agriculture collapse at the same time. 3. Iowa is considered the heart of American agriculture. No other state produces as much corn and pork. But in 2025, this massive surplus is suddenly becoming a heavy burden. Grain silos are filled to the brim, pigs are ready for delivery, but more and more buyers are pulling back. Canada's retaliatory tariffs have made American pork significantly more expensive. At the same time, shipments of corn and soybeans are being delayed or held at the border because of new quality regulations. As a result, big retail chains are starting to source their goods from Brazil and Europe, where they expect lower prices and fewer political risks. For the farmers in Iowa, the consequences are dramatic. Some hog operations are stopping breeding, others are selling machinery or downsizing their herds. In several rural areas, there's already talk about skipping the upcoming planting season, not because of a lack of seeds, modern tech, or experience, but because no one can guarantee that the next harvest will find a buyer. That's exactly why Iowa is a warning sign for the whole country. When even one of America's most productive ag states is thinking about producing less food, it's no longer just a trade crisis. It's the start of a systemic failure that could eventually reach every American dinner table. 4. Kansas. For generations, Kansas has proudly carried the name America's breadbasket. Nearly 1/5 of American wheat comes from this state. But in 2025, those golden fields are turning into an economic risk. It's not drought or pests threatening the farmers, but Canada's stricter regulations for pesticide residues and imported grain. In a short period, shipments were halted, export contracts canceled, and warehouses filled to their limits. Some operations are already storing their second harvest, even though the first still hasn't found a buyer. While wheat prices fall, the costs for storage, transport, and loans are all rising at the same time. Small towns whose economies have relied on agriculture for decades are being hit especially hard. Cooperatives are losing contracts, mills are cutting production, and family farms are falling deeper into financial trouble. For many farmers, the worst part isn't even the lost profit, but the feeling that their work suddenly isn't needed anymore. The irony is hard to miss. While domestic wheat sits in silos, American supermarkets are selling more expensive flour from Australia or Argentina. Kansas is still producing plenty of grain, but the market has stopped rewarding that effort. If even America's breadbasket can't sell its harvest anymore, it raises a worrying question. How secure is the country's food supply really? Point 5. Wisconsin. In the U.S., Wisconsin is inseparable from milk and cheese. Thousands of family farms have built this tradition over generations. But in 2025, the state's very symbol has become the center of a severe crisis. New Canadian requirements for traceability, storage, and transport mean that many dairy products are losing their most important market. Orders are being canceled, cold storage is filling up, and trucks are sitting idle in farmyards. But milk can't be stored for months. That's why some farmers are having to dump huge amounts of it, even though it's fresh and perfectly fine to eat. For people who start work every morning before sunrise, that sight is almost unbearable. The consequences have already reached consumers. Even though milk and cheese are produced right in Wisconsin, prices at the supermarket are going up. Storage costs, transport losses, and canceled contracts are eventually passed on to the customers. At the same time, farmers are earning less than before. But it's about more than just money. Cheese festivals are seeing fewer visitors, young people are doubting a future in farming, and family farms are wondering if their work is even worth it anymore. If even Wisconsin's famous dairy industry can be shaken by a single trade rule, it leaves a worrying question: which industry is next? 6. Michigan. For decades, Michigan lived off its direct link to Canada. Apples, milk, grain, and processed foods were shipped across the border to Ontario every day. But in 2025, that familiar flow of goods has gone quiet. Containers are sitting still, contracts are frozen, and huge amounts of agricultural products suddenly have no buyer. Canada is demanding stricter controls on preservatives and more precise traceability of origin. What looks like a technical rule on paper has become an almost closed border for Michigan. Apples are left on plantations, milk shipments are delayed, and packing plants are losing major contracts. It's especially bitter for the workers and farmers. Many have followed all the rules, delivered reliably, and modernized their operations. Yet now they have to explain why shifts are being cut, orders canceled, and jobs put at risk. It's not just income being lost, but trust in a partnership that was taken for granted for a long time. Some cooperatives are trying to sell more products within their own state, but local markets can't really replace the lost exports. Michigan shows how quickly a functioning trade link can break. And when containers are sitting idle at one of North America's most important borders, the question remains: how much longer can these businesses hold on? 7. Minnesota is in an especially dangerous spot in 2025 because the state is being squeezed from two sides. On one hand, its food industry depends on stable energy imports from Canada, especially hydroelectric power from Manitoba. On the other hand, Minnesota is losing access to the Canadian market for dairy, meat, and frozen vegetables at the same time. New permits for energy exports are causing electricity costs to rise slowly but steadily. This is a heavy blow for cold storage and processing plants, as their production depends on low and predictable energy costs. Some factories are already cutting shifts or postponing investments. At the same time, food shipments are sitting at the border longer and longer. A delivery that used to take 3 days sometimes waits for several weeks now. By the time it comes back, the goods are often no longer fit for sale. Supermarkets then cancel their orders, while farmers and businesses are left on the hook for the losses. The dangerous thing is that the crisis starts almost invisibly. The lights in the factories are still on, and the farms are still working. But behind the scenes, the exhaustion is growing. Minnesota shows what happens when a state can no longer control its own energy or its most important markets. And that's exactly what makes this crisis so hard to predict. From Texas to Minnesota, the same worrying picture is emerging. The fields keep producing, the barns are full, and the factories are still running. But buyers are disappearing, contracts are being canceled, and more farmers are losing hope that the next harvest will even be worth it. This crisis doesn't mean American farmers have gotten worse at what they do. Instead, it shows how dependent even the most powerful agricultural economy is on political decisions, open borders, and stable trade relationships. One new regulation is enough to block supply chains, put jobs at risk, and shake entire communities. So the key question is no longer which state will be hit next. The question is what happens when more and more farmers stop planting because no one wants to buy their products. Then it's not just about exports or prices anymore. Then it's about America's ability to feed its own people. If you live in one of these states or are seeing similar trends, share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to the channel and share this video so more people can learn what's really happening in America's fields.